A lot of people often think that when you get divorced, or we now have the final order in divorce, your marriage is now dissolved, that's it, you're finished, your claims are therefore against each other are dismissed, but that's not right.
You've gone through the divorce journey, looking at life after divorce. If it's tricky, if something's happening, if something doesn't feel right, you can take some advice.
Yes, and always trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, there's a fair chance it's not right.
When you're sorting out your divorce, you've got to think about the finances. So go and take some advice. Go and speak to a lawyer about how you can get that sorted. But to give yourself certainty going forward, knowing that your finances are going to be staying as they are at that moment, get that consent order, get yourself finality.
As family lawyers, it's not a transactional process. You're absolutely right. I have fantastic relationships with many clients, years and frighteningly now decades.
Hello and welcome to this Irwin Mitchell podcast. My name is Zahra Pabani. I'm a partner here at Irwin Mitchell. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, great to have you back. Over 2 episodes, we're talking about life after divorce and what that journey looks like. On the first episode, we focused on co-parenting and how difficult and challenging that can be. And we tried to offer some guidance and support for you and your families. In this episode, we're going to be talking about finances, what that looks like, what it feels like, things that you can do to protect you and your family. Joining me today for this discussion, I have Nick Allen, KC, barrister from 29 Bedford Row Chambers, Fran Hipperson, family law partner here at Irwin Mitchell, and Clare Wiseman, family law partner and national head of the family team here at Irwin Mitchell. Thanks for joining me, guys. Fran, I'm going to start with you. So the process of divorce can be so incredibly emotive, and you finally, as an individual, get yourself through that process. But at the end, and you think you're done, you think that's final. But if you haven't resolved the finances, is it final? What are the issues that can arise if you do the divorce without the finances?
That's a really good point, Zahra. I think a lot of people often think that when you get divorced, or we now have the final order in divorce, your marriage is now dissolved, that's it, you're finished, your claims are therefore against each other are dismissed, but that's not right. And so running alongside the actual dissolution of the marriage, the divorce itself is sorting out the finances. Really good example. There was a case where a couple had been separated for decades. One partner then does quite well financially, but because they'd never sorted out their finances, hadn't had a consent order, an order from the court, the other party then wanted to come and try and see if they could get a bit of that. And so those issues are really important for people to be aware of. And so when you're sorting out your divorce, you've got to think about the finances. And we always say the only way to achieve finality and certainty is to have a consent order approved by the court. So go and take some advice. Go and speak to a lawyer about how you can get that sorted.
And do lawyers always give that advice? Would you find a lawyer who's just going talking to you about the divorce and not about the finances?
You absolutely shouldn't do. Any family lawyer that you go to see should be talking you through the divorce process itself, what that means, what the steps involved are, how long it's going to take, but also talking to you about your finances and looking at what that means for you in the future. How are you going to meet your needs? What sort of settlement would be appropriate for you and any children involved as well?
And from that case, you were saying it's really important, even if you haven't got any money, do it anyway. Get that final order because you don't know what the future might bring. A windfall, maybe, that you don't necessarily want to share post-divorce.
Exactly. It could be a windfall. It could be a business deal. It could be an inheritance. It could be anything. But to give yourself certainty going forward, knowing that your finances are going to be staying as they are at that moment, get that consent order, get yourself finality.
Thank you. Nick, turning to you. After divorce, again, say you've got your consent order, you've sorted out the finances, you've ticked all the right boxes, you've listened to the legal advice. What if something goes wrong? What if somebody lied and there's a whole heap of money that you didn't know about? Or worse, there's less money, or a business that goes belly up and you thought that business was going to provide you with the financial security for you and your family for the future. So you've come all the way through this process, you've spent money on it, there's a problem. What do you do?
Well, the first point is that there is a positive duty on anybody in what we call financial remedy proceedings dealing with the finances on divorce to tell the truth, to give what we call full, frank and clear financial disclosure. And so the system works on the basis that people tell the truth and that they can be punished if they don't tell the truth. What that means is if you get your financial order, you get your consent order, and it turns out that somebody has lied, not told the truth, you can apply to the court to set aside the court order. And you can say to the court, look, I entered this deal on the basis that the financial picture was X, and it turns out that the financial picture is Y. And then the court will look at that and decide whether the non-disclosure is material, whether it's relevant to outcome. If somebody forgets that they've got £10 in a post office savings account, yes, they forgot, whether deliberately forgot or inadvertently forgot, no one's going to set aside the order for that. But if that £10 is actually £10 million, it's going to make a very big difference. So you can, the first answer is you can apply if somebody has lied.
Which is reassuring. That's what you want. You've spent a lot of money. You've got through this process. It's very reassuring to know that there's something you can do about it. But I suppose you can't just think something's wrong. You've got to know. You've got to be able to prove it.
Yes, because as you'd expect, courts work on evidence. They don't work on suspicion. Yeah. They don't work on, instinct in that sense. I think the answer to the second part of your question is, well, what happens if, there isn't, things change? A lot depends on whether the order leaves you financially linked or not.
Okay.
Because we were talking before about a simple dismissal of claims, what we can call a clean break order. Now, that can either be you each keep what you've got, or it can be one party has to pay a lump sum or transfer a property or share their pension. But those are one-off court orders. Once they're done and they're implemented, you go your separate ways. You can be linked financially by the paying of maintenance. And orders where you continue to be linked financially, you can apply to the court to vary. You can apply to the court to change if circumstances change. So if your circumstances change in the future, whether you can do something about it and what you can do about it depends really on whether there's been a clean break between you, no ongoing financial link, or there remains a financial link that you can apply to vary.
So there are options. If you've gone through the divorce journey, looking at life after divorce, if it's tricky, if something's happening, something doesn't feel right, you can take some advice.
Yes, and always trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, there's a fair chance it's not right.
And so have a conversation with somebody about
it. If
take that legal advice.
If somebody says they've got absolutely no money and you've done a clean break basis, and then next thing you know, they're flying around the world, first class, business class, or driving high-end cars, there may be some questions to be asked. Don't suffer in silence. Take some advice.
Good. That's good to know. Claire, coming to you, this process of divorce, it's not just about the law. It's incredibly emotive. And as a family lawyer, I know you spend a lot of time with your clients through the journey and post the journey. What does that look like for you? How do you actually lend that support to clients? And what other support can you tell them about?
Yeah, I think that's one of the joys of the job. I'm sure we'd all agree as family lawyers, it's not a transactional process. You're absolutely right. I have fantastic relationships with many, many clients, years and frighteningly now decades after the divorce process has been concluded. I have even appeared in a groom's speech at a wedding I attended, which was quite special.
Positively,
very positively, yeah. And I think the thing for me, Zahra, is that it's about the foundations you build during the divorce process, whilst you're supporting that client, and particularly around the caring element of what we do. That comes quite naturally to me. I'm a caring person. It's who I am and what I am, and I think that comes relatively easy. But it's about making sure that you're providing more than just legal support to your client, and that's a rewarding aspect of what we do. So one example, I know it's controversial, but one thing I've always taken to heart is trying to go the extra mile, to coin a phrase, doing something different and being available to the client outside of hours. With the international work that Fran and I do, for example, that's a given. It's not 9 to 5, but being available to clients when they need you. It can play havoc with your personal life, but I've navigated that. But I think clients have appreciated that. And a couple of recent examples, only in the last couple of weeks, I've had a couple of clients reach out to me both of whom I probably haven't acted for 10 years or so. The first was a client, he sent me a fabulous photograph of his son starting sixth form, and his words were so powerful. He said, this is thanks to you, you changed my life. And I don't think I did change his life, but his life has changed, and I was part of that journey. And then the other client I was chatting to recently, she reminded me that shortly after her divorce, we organised a party. There were a number of clients who came, and we had a bit of a pamper afternoon. It was a fantastic event, but she made connections at that party that are now lifelong friends and supporters of her, because we have to remember that a divorce process is like a bereavement, and
absolutely.
clients really struggle. They're in a really emotional, fragile place in their life, and the relationships that they form with us and other people that we introduce them to are really strong and long lasting. Turning to the point you raised, Zahra, about what we can do for them after the divorce process, I think it's that trusted advisor role. So Fran and I were chatting about the fact that we will get calls from clients, friends of clients, both at the highs and lows of their journey after divorce. So they might be selling a company, selling a house, buying a company. So they think of us to signpost them to other lawyers or advisors, often within Irwin Mitchell or otherwise. And equally when they're struggling again. I've had clients reach out to me when they're really struggling emotionally, they're in a really bad, dark place, and they just think, I'm just going to call Clare and see if she can help me. So it's an absolutely fantastic part of what we do.
And it's part counsellor as well as part lawyer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's right to know where your professional boundaries and expertise lie. So to know when you need to signpost to a counsellor or coach, and it's fantastic at Irwin Mitchell that we have our own coach and counsellor, and she's the one with the expertise. But you can still be a friendly ear, you can still be a shoulder to lean on, and it's about knowing to get the right support and experts in around them.
Thank you. Coming to you again, Fran, we're talking about, it's not just about life after divorce. The journey can really dictate what that life after divorce piece looks like. So does it follow if it was incredibly acrimonious, then it's going to be really difficult moving forward? Or if it was amicable, maybe it'll flow in the right direction? Do you see people who go through divorce and finances being friends afterwards? What do you see in your practice?
I do see that, yes. I've got some clients who stick in my memory because she will always have Christmas with her ex-husband. They all get together because that works for them. And I think this area of law in particular, it's about what works for a particular family, a particular individual. So that works for her. They're all happy with that. But what it means for their children in that particular circumstance is they've got Christmas Day with both of their parents, which they love, and that's what works. Other clients, that wouldn't work for them, and they come up with a different arrangement. It's about remembering that everybody's going to want to do something slightly different. And sometimes the journey to get there has been really hard. We've all had cases where it's been quite difficult, perhaps quite acrimonious, but it doesn't mean it has to carry on like that. Quite often, I find that when the dust has settled, the finances are finished, you've got your order that we were talking about earlier, then things can start to calm down a bit. Hopefully relationships, if they have become slightly frayed, can repair. So I don't think that clients should be in despair that if perhaps they have had a really tough time during the divorce process itself, that's going to dictate the rest of their future. But equally, that does turn your mind to, well, how can we sort this out without it being acrimonious? What approach could we take? And at Irwin Mitchell, we now have 4 mediators. So that's one way of resolving a dispute that doesn't involve going to court. It's sitting down with a mediator, trying to resolve your finances, trying to reach an agreement between yourselves. Equally, we have collaboratively trained lawyers. So that's another approach of wanting to avoid court and reach a resolution. We also have a colleague now who is starting to offer private financial dispute resolution. And so that's another way of somebody coming in and giving you a view as to what the likely outcome of your financial position would be, so that people can sit down, have a discussion and try to reach a consensus. Because I think it's probably fair to say that if a couple are able to sit down and agree what should happen to their finances, they're far more likely to stick to that, have fewer disputes about that in the future, and have been able to maintain a really good and amicable working relationship going forward, which is, of course, particularly important for people with children.
So communication. Every
Absolutely.
step of the way, communication during the process is going to lead, hopefully, to positive communication post. And it can happen. It can
Absolutely.
happen and should, particularly like you say, if they've got children. That's a really important reason to keep the doors and lines and air of communication going in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Nick, coming back to you, some people don't want to use a lawyer. They think it's expensive, or whether they can afford it or not, they just don't want to do that. They want to deal with their personal affairs themselves. Do you have to use a lawyer? And if you do have to use one or want to use one, how do you choose one?
You certainly don't have to use a lawyer. You can do the divorce forms online, click a button, and you'll get your conditional order, you'll get your final order of divorce. In terms of the finances, you don't have to use a lawyer. If you sit across the kitchen table and you reach an agreement with your spouse and you fill out the relevant court form, you can send it to the court and ask the court to approve that order. So you don't need to use a lawyer.
You make it sound very simple.
It's simple. I don't like filling out those forms when I've done it on behalf of clients, but it's a fill in the blank form. But the advantage, I think, of going to any kind of professional, in this context, a lawyer, is they provide you with information. They provide you with advice. They empower you to make better decisions. Because I think as lawyers, our role is not to take decisions for our clients. They often say, what would you do? Or sometimes they say, would you take the decision for you? And I think we have to say, no, it's your life, to pick up the way that you phrased the question. We can assist you and we can provide you with the information to make those better, more informed decisions.
Or perhaps sense check what they have agreed over the kitchen table.
Absolutely. And the lawyer can say, well, have you thought about the pension? It's very often that particularly if a couple is relatively young and pension age may be sometime in the future, they focus on what's the fair division of the house, what's the fair division of the bank account. But if, for example, one of the parties has given up employment outside of the home to be the main carer for young children, they're going to be out of pensionable employment for many years, and it may be fair for them to have a share of their partner's pension, even though that pension age may be 15, 20, 25 years ahead. And I think that's the kind of sense check that a lawyer can provide. If that party then says, well, thank you very much, I didn't know about that, I thought about it, we've discussed it, we still want to do our own deal, then the lawyer has done his or her job.
Yeah. But coming back to you, Clare, there are so many options. Fran's given us some options that clients can go down. We've talked about whether you use a lawyer or not. What are the options for clients and what do you advocate to them?
Yeah, you're right, Zahra. So there are significantly more options now than there used to be, which is fantastic. A lot of the examples Fran gave about the alternative ways of resolving matters, mediation, collaborative law, private FDRs, they weren't available 10 or 20 years ago. But for me, it's not only what options there are, but how we as lawyers deploy them. So I think there's 3 or 4 things I would always think about with a client. So we would go through the options that we've spoken about, and as Nick's touched on about court being one of them. For me personally, unless there's a binary issue that needs resolving, court should be very much a last resort. It can often be a pretty horrific experience for clients, but it's about making the right decision for that particular client, taking into account everything else at play. So where are they emotionally? Where are they financially? are there any trigger points? Is there any urgency required? So that might affect which options you might choose. I think bearing in mind the children for me, so having a process that does put the children at the heart of it, I think is fabulous. That's why I particularly enjoy the collaborative work, because it's putting the children front and centre, and you are collectively as a team, both your client and yourself and the other client, the other party and their lawyer, you're trying to get an outcome that is the best for the family, which isn't always the case. But for me, it's also bearing in mind the huge responsibility we have as lawyers to engage in that process ourselves in the most appropriate way. You often hear the horror story, everything was okay until the lawyers got involved. To me, that's quite shameful. And I have numerous examples of how the lawyers themselves have inflamed the process. So if I'm asked to advise a client on options, I might also consider very carefully which other lawyer I signpost. I don't like the phrase the other party, the opponent, but we use it, don't we? Who I signpost them to. So I think it's a holistic approach to the choice of options. And then the next stage for me is having a wider team around them. So it might be medical, it might be spiritual, it might be financial. So it's not just operating as a lawyer in isolation. And I think all of that in the mixing bowl, hopefully you'll get to the right option and the right approach.
And then the client needs to know they're not alone. And you're putting yourself and other people around them, like we said earlier, team client. Clients need to feel that support in this scenario, don't they? They need to know that they're getting the right advice from the right people and that they're being signposted in the right way.
They definitely do. And what's interesting is clients have often said to me when we've reflected after the process that they have found it reassuring that you have sometimes joined their team. So they might have an existing financial advisor. So don't come in and try and change everything. Work with their advisor. They might already have a counsellor and they want you to speak to them. So don't change everything. They're building a relationship with you. That's new. So join their team. But you're absolutely right. It's I always say to clients, get that safety net around you, get your friends around you, get everybody in your team so we can move forward together.
And we are the advisors, but the client's the boss. They give the instruction.
Absolutely.
So we're not just joining their team, we're working for them, with them, but for them.
Yeah, and it goes exactly to the point Nick just made, where so often clients say to you, okay, I hear all of that. What do you want me to do? You've given me 2 or 3 options. What do you advise? And that's quite hard because we are solution focused. It is quite hard not to say, well, I would do this, but you've just got to tease their decision out of them.
But also not sitting on the fence, because they are paying us for a decision ultimately, or direct advice. So sometimes they might say, well, should I do this or this? And you will know, won't you? You will know what, and you can tease it out of them. But I think the listeners need to know that you will tell them as well. If they're so lost and they're not sure, you will tell them, you will guide them, and you'll get there together.
And they often will have made a decision, good, bad or otherwise, or taken an action, good, bad or otherwise. And then you're trying to advise them as to the consequences of that and how we might have to shift things moving forwards.
It's really important to have honest advice. Better hear it from you than anybody else. Thank you. So Fran, coming back to you. So on this journey of divorce, people often think about what life after divorce is going to look like when they're not even there yet. And they've got to think about what they need for the future financially, for themselves and for their family, forever and a day. I mean, that's impossible. They haven't got a crystal ball. When you ask them what they need, they don't have a clue. So how do we help them? And how do you work that out with clients?
I think it comes back to the point that Claire's just mentioned about having the right people in place, having the team. So if a client has a financial advisor, get them on board straight away, have a conversation. I have some really sophisticated clients with very complex situations that can't tell me what their income needs are because they've actually never really had to think about it. And so getting that person on board, whether it's their accountant, their IFA, whoever they're engaging with, so they can help you to really understand what that client's position is, and then start to produce a document that we call an income needs schedule. It's essentially, what are your monthly outgoings? Because that's the best way to really start to drill down into what this person, what this family
So that's what you spend on food and bills and
your
going on
utility
holiday.
bills, all of that. So it can sometimes involve going through bank statements and credit cards, just to really see what's going on. And then getting that schedule produced so that we can say, okay, well, you need pounds X per month. And then that feeds into the settlement that you're looking for. Nick was talking earlier about whether you have an ongoing order for maintenance or whether perhaps you have a clean break. Now, if you have a clean break, what that means is there is no ongoing maintenance. So you need to know that the sum of money that you're going to get at the end of this process is going to do you for the rest of your life. And in order to work that out, you need to know what you need on a monthly basis. So it's involving those other advisors and really drilling down. The other point that Nick mentioned earlier was pensions. And people do forget, or they negotiate because at the time the focus might be on, I really want to keep my house. That's often something we hear from people, and they forget about pensions. But of course, if you're looking at your future, you need to know what's my income in retirement. So we will invariably say to clients, let's get a pension advisor involved. Let's get them looking at the pensions. Let's work out what you've both got and what income, crucially, those pensions are going to produce for you in the future. So that when we are crystal ball gazing, because there is a degree of that, you said that in your question, there is a degree of that. But in order to make this as certain as we can for clients, we need that pension report. We need probably that financial advisor to be helping us so that when we come up to the point where we're making a settlement proposal or looking at a proposal that perhaps has been put to us, we can really analyse for the client what that's going to mean now and in the future.
So there's nothing to be scared of. You can take them through it step by step and work it out together.
Absolutely. It's something that day in, day out we are doing. It is our job to make sure that when these clients go on their way, move on with their lives in the way that Claire has talked about, we are wanting to be their supporter, be their advisor, and we want to know that those clients are going to be okay.
Thank you. Nick, so we've talked about there's lots of different ways to do this and think about how you want to do it. And as a client, what your choice is, how you want to proceed with your case. Going to court must be an absolute last resort. A, because it's incredibly expensive, and B, because emotionally it can break people, probably. When would you actually have to go to court? What's the necessity about court?
Well, I certainly agree with what Clare said, that court is a last resort. And I think all good family lawyers see court as a last resort. One family lawyer once said to me that if any of my cases do go to court, I think I failed. I'm not necessarily sure I think it in quite those terms, but I understood what they meant when they said it to me. At the end of the day, if you're going to have a negotiated settlement through any of the non-court dispute resolution ways that we've discussed today, you have to have somebody who's willing to have a negotiation with you. Mm-hmm. Takes two to tango.
Absolutely.
So if, for good, bad or indifferent reason, your former spouse is just not engaging or is not giving the financial disclosure I mentioned earlier, or is refusing to negotiate, or is only willing to offer to accept figures that your lawyer is telling you no judge would ever order, or in a very small number of cases, you may stumble upon a kind of novel legal point that needs to be determined, but they're vanishingly rare. Those are the kind of circumstances where you end up in court, because the court's got the power to require financial disclosure to be given. And if somebody is ordered to do something and they don't do it, they can be held in contempt of court, and you can be punished for contempt of court in the ways people would think, being fined, ultimately being imprisoned. But even if you begin the court process, the vast majority of cases resolve consensually without going to what we call a final hearing, where the judge imposes an outcome on you. So you may not have succeeded in your mediation, you may not have succeeded in your collaborative law, you may not have succeeded with your other forms of non-court dispute resolution, and so you've started the court process. But I always tell clients, and I hear solicitors tell clients, that they mustn't feel the moment that they've boarded, if you like, the court train, that it's like a runaway train, that they lose control of the process, because the vast majority of cases within the court process resolve for all the reasons we've talked about, including your own deal, it's more likely to work. But ultimately, if the other side haven't made a sensible offer or haven't engaged, and you need a judge to impose an outcome on you both, there are judges out who will do it.
Or I suppose if you feel like someone's being dishonest. So we talked about
Yeah.
dishonesty after the divorce process, but during the process, if you feel like someone's being dishonest, then that's when you might need some court intervention. And the other thing is it can be a really frightening place. How do you talk to your clients about entering into that room? Some people have never been in a courtroom. They don't ever want to go near one. But if they have to, and it could be a means to an end, you might start the court process, as you said, but you might settle the case, just a means to an end. How do you explain to your clients about how it's going to be, and how do you prepare them for that environment?
I mean, the vast majority of the time, it doesn't look like it looks on television. That's the first important thing to say. It tends not to be big courtrooms. And I know I mentioned before barristers in wigs and gowns, but that only happens in the criminal courts, really. So you don't see that in the family courts. The vast majority of the time, you're before a judge called a district judge, and you're in his or her chambers, which is just a posh word for their private room.
And it's just an office room, like an office.
It's an office room, and you're usually sat round an oblong table with the judge at sort of one end of the oblong table, and you're sat next to your solicitor or your solicitor and barrister down one side of the table. Now, it can, of course, be the first time that a client has seen their spouse in a number of months, or in some circumstances years,
which can be really distressing.
Which can be very distressing. And I think, and this is something that's often, I think, handled more by a solicitor preparing the client for court than a barrister. But it's the points that Fran and Clare have made, that part of your job as a lawyer is to say, will this be the first time that you've seen your ex since they moved out or you moved out? It's that you're not being a sort of black letter lawyer when you fulfill that part of the job, but you are doing the job.
Yeah, it's part of pastoral, isn't it? It's
Correct.
Pastoral care. How do you prepare your clients for that then, Clare?
It can be difficult, and I think it's often overlooked. Clients have often said to me after a hearing or a process that how horrific it was to hear almost total strangers, particularly the barristers that might be doing the advocacy for us. They have certainly met the clients less frequently than we have, hearing total strangers talking about the most private aspects of your life, your feelings, your actions, your plans and worries for the future. It can almost seem like you're in a parallel universe, and how distressing that is. And I think if you don't prepare them for the mechanics of the process, but also how that's going to impact them, it can be a worry. And simple things like we have to say to them, please don't grimace, please don't shout. They will inevitably frequently cry.
That's how the barristers do this, Clare,
and the judges, they're terrible. But people, it's a very emotional. It's a hotbed of emotion, and I think it's not only about preparing them about the room and the process and the hearing, but how they're going to feel and how they might react.
And Fran as well, preparing them. I know that you can talk to people about what you're going to wear. I mean, that's what they would worry about.
Absolutely.
What they're going to wear, what time they should get there, and what it's going to feel like, and will they have a drink of water, things like that.
Yeah, it is things like that. And I think for anybody who's watching, who's going to be going through a court process, it's get there on time, early. Much better to be there half an hour early than to be panicking you're going to miss your hearing. When you get there, try and find the person called the usher. That's the person who's going to be able to tell you which courtroom you're going to be going in and who your judge is, so that you know which room to head to. When you sit down, if you're with your lawyers will do the talking. I often get asked by clients, they're very nervous that the judge is going to direct questions at them. And sometimes a judge will, but that's quite rare. If you've got your lawyers there, usually your barrister, somebody like Nick, they will be the person that the judge directs the question at, and you're sat there. That doesn't mean you don't have a say. If there's something you want to say, we always say, pop it on a post-it note, hand it to us.
But these are in the early hearings.
These are in the early hearings where you'll be sat there and you'll be getting used to what this court system is like. In terms of what you're wearing, I think you need to be comfortable but smart. That's what I always say to clients. Try to be comfortable and smart. Courtrooms can be quite cold, I have found. So, it's things like that. Just making sure that the client is aware of what it's going to be like. The fact that the judge will be sat at the front, as Nick has already described, that you're usually sat down one side each, that you might therefore be opposite your other half who you've not seen for a while, so that they are, when that happens, they're prepared. They're not taken by surprise by anything.
It's that preparation that's so key, isn't it?
Can I just add to that, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Only because we as family lawyers are a lot more attuned to issues of domestic abuse, particularly since Parliament passed the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. And I think we're alive to the fact that court proceedings can be used to either start or perpetuate domestic abuse. And as a result of that, we've got a lot better at asking the court to put in place what we call special measures. So just adding to what's just been said, if you are frightened of your former partner, you can ask the court to ensure that you have a separate entrance and a separate exit to the court. You can ask the court to ensure that you've got a separate waiting room. You can ensure that either you go into court with your lawyers first and your ex follows you. So in the sense that you're not walking into the door of the court, into the courtroom together. The court can put a physical screen in court, so you don't see your former partner. So I think if people are particularly worried about going to court and seeing their ex for the first time, and they have been victims of domestic abuse, there are things that solicitors can ask the court to do to minimise that and make what we all know is going to be a very difficult experience, in relative terms, as easy as it can be.
Thank you for that, Nick, because that's incredibly reassuring, I can imagine, to lots of people who have gone through a difficult time in whatever way or shape or form that takes. Changing direction. So, Clare, people get through this. It doesn't feel like it, and it is an incredibly difficult time, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we take the people, we move forward, and we get to the solutions, and we come out the other end. And sometimes people fall in love again. Now, even though they say, never, ever again am I going to be in that situation, and we're all divorce lawyers, but I believe we're all about the love. So people can genuinely think, wow, I'm in this situation. Perhaps I'm going to get married again. Perhaps I'm going to move in with somebody again. But they're frightened because of what they've been through. Once bitten, twice shy. Do they follow their head? Do they follow their heart? You said you'd been, noted in a speech. I'm sure you've been invited to weddings of clients before. What do you advise them in that situation?
Yes, so for me, absolutely follow your heart, but take your brain with you. And I think that when we see clients on that journey outside of, say, the first divorce into a second relationship, and as you say, often into second marriages, they're more cautious. It's a fact of life, isn't it? Your experiences shape your decisions and your feelings moving forwards. So they will be more cautious about protecting their assets, looking after, say, children of a first relationship if they then go on to have children with a new partner. So we will often talk about wealth protection, prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, living together agreements, where they might want to protect the assets they worked so hard to preserve. They might want advice from our colleagues in relation to how to benefit children or grandchildren of a previous relationship, and equally to benefit the children of a new relationship or their partner's existing children. So I certainly detect that sort of caution, that anxiety that you describe. But I would say without exception, most of my clients have gone on to a happy life, to a fulfilled life, to something they didn't envisage before. Lots of clients talk about it, totally changing direction, and putting them into new experiences and new paths that they wouldn't have otherwise thought possible. But absolutely, I think there often is a happy ending. So I think hang in there, try and be positive about the other opportunities that might be available, would certainly be my experience.
And they sometimes remarry their first spouse. But
wow. Yes.
Joan Collins.
Yes, absolutely. Of course. Well, it's good to think about the positives. It's good to think about the way forward. Now, we're coming into land now. So I'd like to come to all of you and ask you to give me one takeaway for our listeners. If they're going through on this journey of navigating life after divorce and they're worried about finances or thinking about finances, what's one thing that you would say to them to take away and reflect on or think about or pursue? Nick, coming to you first.
I would say no question too stupid. You're paying for a service, that person is there to support you. If you want to know something, ask. Because if it's important to you, it is important. And it's important that you let your lawyer know that it's important to you.
Yeah, and knowledge is everything. Knowledge
Knowledge
is power.
is everything.
And, you can make an informed decision.
Correct.
Then it's your choice. Thank you for that. Claire, coming to you, same question.
And perhaps more from the emotional side, that it's often the case, isn't it, that the most difficult of journeys takes you to the most fabulous of places. And it's about that element of hope, that there really is life after divorce, and not to despair.
Thank you. Fran.
I think it's about empowering clients and taking the advice from lots of different people. So probably encompassing both of those points. It's ask the questions, get the advice, see the right people so that you know where you're going and have the confidence to move forward positively.
Thank you. Thank you all for a really interesting conversation today. And thank you to our listeners for joining in. Please do hit that subscribe button so that you can hear more advice, guidance and stories from us here at Irwin Mitchell. We've been talking about life after divorce, and what we want you to know is that you're not alone. If you need advice, support, help in any way, shape or form, please do reach out. We're here for you. Take care, thank you and goodbye.